On a deserted farm road, three bullies are closing in on their latest victim, a lone girl with a flat tire. They're laughing, stealing her only tool, feeling powerful. But in their moment of triumph, they made a catastrophic mistake. They never looked behind them. They never saw the solitary figure watching from the shadows, a man whose very presence means that their world is about to be torn apart. This is the story of how a single moment of cruelty triggered a wave of revenge so absolute, it became local legend. This is the day these boys learned that karma doesn't always whisper. Sometimes it roars. Before we witness their reckoning, tell me, from which part of the country are you watching this story of justice? Leave a comment right now. Ilara's world was the 40-acre patch of Iowa dirt her family had worked for 3 generations. It was a world of dawn choruses and the earthy smell of turned soil, of calusas earned honestly in a silence that wasn't lonely, but full. At 22, she was the sole inheritor of it all after a tractor accident took her father 2 winters prior, and a quiet grief stole her mother a year after that. The farm was her anchor and her burden, a beautiful crumbling monument to a love that was now just memory. She lived in faded flannel and worn jeans. Her son, bleached hair always in a long, functional braid down her back. Her only confidence were a one-eyed border collie named Gus and the dozen or so chickens that followed her around the yard like feathered, clucking disciples. The town of Oak Creek, just 5 miles down the paved county road, might as well have been a different planet. To Ilara, it was a place of harsh fluorescent lights and sharper tongues. It was where she went for feed and supplies, and where, without fail, she encountered them. Troy, Brett, and Kyle, a trio of local royalty, their status cemented by their high school football glory days that had peaked 4 years ago and were now their entire personalities. They wore their varsity jackets, blue and gold, long after their lettering had lost its meaning, the emblems of a kingdom that had shrunk to the confines of a dusty diner and the parking lot of the town's only stoplight. To them, Elora was a ghost, a caricature. Farm girl, they'd sneer as she passed, her arms laden with sacks of grain. Hey, moo maid. Your boyfriend waiting for you in the barn. Their laughter was a sound that stuck to her skin, cold and greasy. It had started in school, this casual cruelty, and had simply never ended. For them, it was a hobby. For her, it was the slow, constant erosion of her spirit. She never fought back. Fighting back required a belief that things could change, and Ilara's life had taught her that things only ever got harder. The confrontation that changed everything began with a flat tire. Her old pickup, a rust bucket Ford that had been her father's pride, had blown a rear on a desolate stretch of Miller's Lane, a dirt track that cut between vast, rolling cornfields, the stalks standing tall and green, whispering secrets in the wind. It was a place of profound isolation, beautiful and, in that moment, terrifyingly vulnerable. She had the jack out, the lug wrench in her hand, her muscles straining against a rusted bolt, when the familiar rumble of a souped-up Chevy engine cut through the afternoon quiet. Her heart sank into her work boots. It was them. The car pulled up, kicking up a cloud of ochre dust that settled over her like a shroud. The doors flew open and they were Troy in the lead, his smirk a weapon in itself. Well, look what the cat dragged in, he drawled, his voice dripping with a fake folksiness that made her skin crawl. Need a strong man to help you out, little lady. She kept her head down, focusing on the wrench. I'm fine. Just move along. But they didn't move along. They circled her, a pack of jackals smelling weakness. Brett kicked the flat tire. Looks like this old heap finally gave up the ghost. Just like your folks. The words were a physical blow, and Ilara flinched, a reaction that fueled them. Kyle snickered, picking up a loose stone and tossing it from hand to hand. You know, Troy said, leaning against her truck, so close she could smell the cheap beer on his breath. This is a real safety hazard, blocking a public road. We might have to call Sheriff Miller. Or maybe, he paused, his eyes glinting with malice. We just handle the fine ourselves. He reached out and yanked the lug wrench from her hand, her only tool, her only defense, now in his grasp. Give it back, she said, her voice small, swallowed by the vastness of the fields. Or what? Troy laughed. You'll set your chickens on me. He tossed the wrench to Brett, who sent it sailing into the tall corn, where it vanished without a trace. A wave of pure, cold despair washed over Ilara. She was stranded utterly alone, at the mercy of boys who had none. What none of them saw, what none of them could have possibly anticipated, was the watcher in the shadows. Half a mile back, partially obscured by a cluster of old oaks, a man sat astride a custom Harley Davidson panhead. The bike was a beast, all polished chrome and black steel, a testament to miles and muscle. The man was its mirror. He was massive, with a broad chest straining against a leather vest. A cut that bore the infamous winged death's head of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. His face was a roadmap of a hard, lived life etched with lines and framed by a graying beard. His name was Moses. He'd been sitting there for 10 minutes, sipping from a canteen, letting the engine cool when the Chevy had pulled up. He saw the whole thing unfold, the intimidation, the theft of the tool, the way the girl's shoulders slumped in a defeat he recognized all too well. Moses wasn't a saint. He'd walked through fire and had the burns to prove it. He'd seen violence that would give these boys nightmares for a lifetime. But there was a code, an unwavering line. You didn't prey on the weak. You didn't corner someone who was alone. And you sure as hell didn't disrespect a person trying to do an honest day's work. As he watched Troy get in Alara's face, his playful taunting turning uglier, something in Moses snapped. It was an old, familiar heat, a protective fury that rose from a place he'd long buried. He remembered a young woman, a long time ago, who had also been backed into a corner. He hadn't been there to help her then. The memory was a ghost that rode with him every single day. He didn't roar. He didn't rev his engine. He simply kicked his bike to life, the low, guttural rumble, not a sound, but a physical presence that vibrated through the very earth. The effect was instantaneous. The three bullies froze, their heads whipping around as if pulled by a single string. The color drained from Troy's face. The casual cruelty in his eyes was replaced by a primal, gut-wrenching fear. Moses rolled forward slowly, the crunch of his tires on the gravel the only sound besides the idle of his engine. He came to a stop a few feet from their car, killing the engine. The sudden silence was more deafening than the roar. He swung a leg off the bike, his heavy boots thudding on the dirt. He didn't look at the boys. Not yet. His eyes went to Alara, who was staring, wide-eyed and trembling, caught between a new unknown fear and a bewildering sense of hope. "You all right, darlin'?" Moses asked, his voice a low gravelly rumble, like stones tumbling in a deep barrel. She could only nod, her throat too tight for words. Finally, Moses turned his gaze to the three young men. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His presence was an entire speech. He looked at Troy, then at the empty space in the corn where the wrench had disappeared. Then back at Troy. He took a single step forward. Troy stumbled back, tripping over his own feet and landing hard on his backside in the dirt. We were leaving," he stammered, his voice cracking like a boy's. "The wrench," Moses said, the two words flat and final. Brett, moving faster than he ever had on a football field, scrambled into the corn, frantically searching. He emerged a moment later, clutching the tool like a holy relic, and practically threw it at Alara's feet. Moses took another step, now looming over Troy. He crouched down, his knees cracking, bringing his face level with the terrified young man's. "Look at me, son," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Troy forced himself to meet the biker's eyes, and what he saw there made him whimper. It wasn't just anger, it was a vast, cold judgment, an ocean of experience in which Troy's petty malice was nothing but a drop. "You see her," Moses said, not raising his voice above a whisper. "You really see her? Or do you just see someone you think can't fight back?" He let the question hang in the air. A man's worth isn't measured by how he treats his equals. It's measured by how he treats those who have nothing he wants. You three, you're not men. You're just noise. He stood up, his body blocking out the sun. "No, you're gonna get in that piece of shit car, and you're gonna drive away. And if I ever see you near this girl again, if I even hear a whisper that you've so much as looked in her direction, the next conversation we have won't be a conversation." You understand the words that are coming out of my mouth. They understood. They understood with a clarity that pierced through every layer of their bravado. They scrambled into the Chevy, the engine coughing to life, and peeled away, their tires spinning, leaving a final, pathetic cloud of dust in their wake. And just like that, they were gone. The silence rushed back in. Alara stood shaking, the lug wrench cold in her hand. She looked at the giant, terrifying stranger who had appeared from nowhere, a mythic guardian angel clad in leather and denim. "Thank you," she whispered, the words finally breaking free. Moses just nodded, his stern expression softening almost imperceptibly. "Let's get that tire changed," he said. But the story doesn't end there. The universe, it seemed, had only just begun to balance the scales. As Moses worked the lug nuts with an effortless strength that left Elora in awe, a new sound began to grow in the distance. It started as a faint hum, then a buzz, then a thunderous, earth-shaking roar. Over the crest of the hill, a line of motorcycles appeared. Not just a few. Dozens. A rolling fortress of steel and chrome and leather. A procession of Hell's Angels, their colors flying in the wind. They filled the road. A seemingly endless river of power and brotherhood. They rolled to a stop behind Moses's bike, the thunder of their engines dying down to a low, menacing idle. A sea of faces, all as hardened and road-worn as Moses's, looked upon the scene. A man with a sergeant at arms patch dismounted and walked over. "Everything copacetic, Mose. We saw you drop back." Moses finished tightening the last lug nut and stood, slapping the dust from his hands. "It's copacetic, Jax. Just had to teach some local boys a lesson in manners." Jax looked from Moses to Alara, then back to the retreating speck of the Chevy in the distance. A slow, grim smile spread across his face. "Seems they got off light." Moses turned to Alara. "You need to get those supplies home." She nodded, still utterly speechless, her mind reeling from the sheer, overwhelming power of the moment. Moses looked at his brothers, then back at her, led the way. And so, Alara, in her old, now repaired pickup truck, drove the 5 miles back to her farm, leading a procession that looked like the end of the world. A lone farm girl, followed by 50 Hell's Angels, their motorcycles forming a protective, roaring phalanx around her. They rode through the center of Oak Creek, and the town stopped. People came out of the diner, the hardware store, their mouths agape. They saw Alara, back straight, head held high for the first time anyone could remember, and they saw the army that rode with her. The message was sent, not with words but with a deafening, undeniable presence. They idled in her yard as she unloaded her feed, Gus the dog wagging his tail furiously, intrigued by the new friends. When she was done, Moses walked up to her porch. He didn't come inside.